Today's sewing project is the Leah dress by Sewciety. This is a free pattern that you can find on the Sewciety website. The fabric that I'm using today is an Atelier Brunette viscose crepe called Domino Ochre. You can find this fabric at the Fluid Plus Drape website. I've left a link to the fabric and to the pattern below so you can check out all the details. The fabric that I'm using is non-stretch, so I would recommend sewing the bodice at your regular measurement and then blending a couple of sizes up at the hip to allow some ease. I hope you join me in sewing this dress. Let's get started. I've transferred my darts onto the wrong side of my front bodice piece. And now I'm ready to pin them in place. Doing this for both darts. Now I'll take my darts to the sewing machine and sew from the outside edge to the point, leaving thread tails at the point so I can tie them in knots. And then press your darts downward. Before I attach the front and back bodice pieces, I'm going to take this front piece to the serger and finish my shoulder edges separately. And I'm going to do the same for the shoulder edges of my back bodice pieces. Now that each of the tops of my shoulders are finished, I'm going to place my front and back pieces right sides together and pin the shoulder seams. Now I'll sew my shoulders with a 1/2-inch seam allowance and press the seams open. Once those shoulder seams are sewn and pressed, open the front and back bodice pieces away from each other. And I'm going to finish the side seams for the front and back pieces on both sides separately. I'm also going to finish the top and the sides for both sleeves separately. Here are my front and back bodice pieces opened out once again, with those side seams finished. Along the side seams of your front and back piece, you have notches indicating where we're going to be placing the edges of the sleeve. Place your sleeve in place, right sides together. Notice that the ends of the sleeve should extend a 1/2 inch beyond those notch markings, and pin in place. And do this on both sides for both sleeves. Now we're going to take the sleeves to the sewing machine and sew with a 1/2-inch seam allowance from notch to notch, backstitching at the beginning and end of your stitches. Starting and stopping your stitching at the notches will allow you to maintain a 1/2-inch seam allowance on both sides, which we'll need for sewing the underarm seam of the sleeves later. And press those sleeve top seam allowances open. Now I'm going to place the front and back pieces right sides together as well as the sleeves. And I'm going to pin together my side seam. And then I'll also pin the underarm seam. Now we're going to sew these seams in 2 stages. Starting at the bottom of the bodice, I'm going to stitch all the way up with a 1/2-inch seam allowance until I get to where my stitches stopped when I attached the sleeve. Backstitch to secure. Then I'll move those seam allowances out of the way on both sides so that I can place my needle right there for a fresh set of stitches from where those sleeve stitches stopped earlier, all the way down to the bottom of the sleeve with a 1/2-inch seam allowance. Making sure once again to backstitch at the beginning of your stitches, and repeat all of these steps on the other side for your opposite side seams. And then take those side seams and underarm seams to the ironing board and press them open. Now for the front skirt piece, I'm going to take it to my sewing machine and sew basting stitches along those side seams, from top to bottom, leaving tails of thread on both ends so I have threads to pull for gathering. Now that I've basted the side edges of my front piece, I'm going to place the front and back skirt pieces right sides together and pin in place at the top edges. Then I'll pull my gathering stitches so that the front and back pieces fit together. Once they fit together and the front gathers are distributed evenly, go ahead and pin in place. And repeat for the other side. Sew those side seams with a 1/2-inch seam allowance and then finish your seams. And I've pressed those seam allowances toward the back pieces. Here are the bottom edges of my front and back pieces opened out at the side seams. I'm going to place my front and back skirt pieces right sides together with the bottom edge of the bodice and pin in place along the bottom edge, matching the raw edges and the side seams. Now, starting from one bottom corner, I'm going to sew all the way across with a 1/2 inch seam allowance and then finish my seam. And I've pressed that seam allowance down toward the bottom of the skirt. Now for my ruffle piece, I'm going to take it to my sewing machine and baste from one top edge all the way across to the opposite top edge, leaving thread tails on both sides so that we can pull those stitches together just as we did to gather the sides of the front skirt piece. Now that I have my gathering stitches in place on the top of my ruffle, I've marked the top center of my ruffle with a pin. I've also marked the bottom center of my front skirt with a pin. Now I'm going to match up those center markings and pin in place. Then I'll start pulling my ruffle gathering stitches so that the ruffle fits the bottom of the dress. Once the ruffle fits the bottom of the dress from one back edge to the pin in place along that gathered edge. And do the same on the other side. Now we're going to sew this seam from one edge with a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way across, and then finish your seams and press your seam upward. I'm going to open up my invisible zipper and take it to my ironing board so I can roll open those coils, pressing them open from top to bottom and doing this for both sides of the zipper tape. Here is the back center edge of one of my back dress pieces. I've gone ahead and finished these edges from top to the bottom of the dress, and I've done this on both sides of the center back. Now I'm going to take the right side of my zipper tape and place it right sides together with my back right dress. I want my top zipper stop to be a 1/2 inch away from the top edge of the dress, and I also want the zipper teeth to be a 1/2 inch away from the center back, and pin in place all the way down. Using a zipper foot or an invisible zipper foot, sew close to those zipper teeth from the top to as far as your presser foot will allow you to get to the bottom of the zipper. Back stitching to secure. Now that my right zipper tape is in place, I'm going to close the zipper, and I'm going to place the left side of the zipper tape right sides together with the left side of the dress. I'm going to pin that zipper tape in place, once again making sure that the top zipper stop on this side is 1/2 inch below the top of the dress, and also that those zipper teeth are 1/2 inch away from the side of the dress, and pin in place. With our zipper closed, we can make sure to align those seams that attach the skirt to the front and back pieces. Now that everything is aligned and pinned, I'll open up my zipper, and I'll sew that left zipper tape in place just as I did on the right side. Now with my zipper completed and closed, I'm going to place the unfinished edges of those bottom skirt and ruffle pieces right sides together and pin in place from the end of my zipper stitching to the bottom of the dress. I'm going to start sewing this portion from the end of my zipper stitches, sewing for the first 2 or 3 inches still using my zipper foot, so that I can get as close to those end zipper stitches as possible. Then I'll switch back to my regular foot and continue with the 1/2 inch seam allowance to the bottom of the ruffle. Apply interfacing to the wrong sides of your front and back facing pieces, and then place them right sides together, matching your shoulder seams and pin in place. Sew these seams with a 1/2 inch seam allowance and press your seams open. I've gone ahead and finished both sides of those shoulder seam allowances separately, as well as finishing the center backs and outer edges. Now to finish the bottom edges of the facing, I'm going to fold it to the wrong side by about 1/4 inch and give that a press all the way around. Now that those finished edges are pressed to the wrong side, I'm going to take it to my sewing machine and edge stitch close to my finishing stitches from center back all the way around to the opposite center back. Now open up your zipper in the back just a bit and open out your zipper flat. Place one of the corresponding center backs of your facing, right sides together with the zipper tape, and pin in place, aligning those edges. And do this for both center backs. Then we're going to take the dress to the sewing machine and sew close to the zipper teeth once again, this time through the facing, from the top to the bottom of the facing, doing this on both sides of the back dress. Now that those edges of the facing are sewn, we're going to take those seam allowances and fold them along the stitching line that we just created, folding them toward the facing, and pin in place. Doing this on both sides. And then continue pinning the top of the facing all around the neckline. Once we have that facing pinned all the way around, we're going to sew all the way around from center back to center back with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now that the facing is sewn, I'm going to trim those top corners and then continue trimming that seam allowance all the way around the neckline. Then I'm going to open out my facing away from the neckline and press that seam allowance up toward the facing. Then we're going to understitch. We're going to sew this seam allowance to the facing, edge stitching close to the stitching line, all the way from center back to center back. As you're understitching, your presser foot won't allow you to understitch all the way to those center back corners, so just understitch as far as you can. Once you're done, turn the facings to the inside, poking out those corners, and give that neckline seam a good press. Now to secure the facing on the inside of the dress so that it doesn't flop around on the inside, I'm going to take it to my sewing machine and stitch in the ditch of my shoulder seams on both sides. I'm going to align the shoulder seams on the outside of the dress and the facing, pinning them in place on both sides. Then, working from the outside of the dress, I'm going to place my needle right inside that shoulder seam and stitch from the top to the bottom of the facing, backstitching to secure. To hem the bottoms of my sleeves, I've chosen to finish the edges all the way around and then fold those edges to the wrong side by 1/2 inch and pin in place. Do this for the bottoms of both sleeves and then edge stitch close to those finished edges all the way around. And for the bottom of the dress, you can decide how deep of a hem you want to create. I've gone ahead and pressed the raw edge to the wrong side all the way around by about 1 inch, and I'm going to roll that hem. I'm going to fold the raw edge to the crease, and then on the crease and pin in place like this all the way around. Once that hem is pinned in place all the way around, I'll take it to my sewing machine and edge stitch close to that upper inner fold all the way around. Give everything a nice final press and the dress is complete. Thank you for watching this sew along. Make sure you check out the rest of my video library for more great sewing inspiration, and I'll see you in the next video.